Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe, and it's great to have you here. I just wanted to say that I love that I get to connect and speak with you in this way. I'm just hugely grateful that you're choosing to spend your precious time with me right now. So let's dive into this episode, which is all about anger. And I recently discovered that I have a difficult relationship with anger, and I didn't know that. I've never thought of myself as an angry person. But it turns out I'd got a lot to learn in this area. So I'd love to share with you in this podcast my own life lessons, because I think when we share our wisdom, we each grow in our own wisdom. And over the last probably 6 months, this has been my learning edge. And I'm still learning, so I don't claim to have all the answers. But the lessons that I've been learning have been so powerful. I wanted to share them with you here. And the catalyst for this really started last year. I had a situation with a close friend that really kind of shook me and left me, I suppose the best word I can describe is discombobulated. I couldn't quite process it. So I decided to take it to my therapist because I love therapy. And as a coach, I'm a huge believer in the power of self-awareness. And I always think, how can I help my clients understand themselves better? If I don't understand myself, because unless we understand ourselves, we can't use that effectively in our lives. So I love having supervision and coaching and therapy to really raise my own awareness. So I took this kind of unsettling situation to my therapist, Joanna, who is amazing. And in the session, she asked me a simple but powerful question. And that question was, where is your anger in this situation? And it was really interesting, my response to that, because my mind got kind of confused and was like, anger? I don't have any. And she reflected back to me, doesn't that strike you as strange? And my kind of mind went into this bizarre kind of place where I was like, is it strange that I don't have anger? Anger's not something I would normally have. And then I started to realise, yes, it was. You see, the situation with my friend had crossed a big personal boundary for me. And a natural response to a boundary being dishonoured would be anger. And I know, like I'm trained in emotional intelligence. I'm an emotional intelligence practitioner. So I know that all emotions are just chemically encoded data. And those emotions are just there to kind of give us a message if we're able to listen to the wisdom in them. So I kind of logically knew that anger would be an appropriate response. The message in that is that a line had been crossed. But for some reason, I wasn't able to connect to my anger. And as I explored this with my therapist, it turns out that that had been a pattern of mine. And it seems I'm not alone in that pattern. If you've ever come across the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, he writes extensively on this subject. So Dr. Gabor Mate is a physician and is a best-selling author and is a renowned expert on the relationship between stress and illness. And in his research, he basically says to us, when we've been prevented from learning how to say no, our bodies may end up saying no for us. So he wrote a particular famous book that's called When the Body Says No. And in that book, he shares some really shocking statistics on women's health and linking it to repressed emotions. That almost when we disassociate from our emotions and relegate them to our unconscious, that confuses kind of our physiological defenses. So when psychologically we're not kind of processing stuff, it shows up physiologically in our body. So he talks about that for some people, when these defenses go awry, they actually become the destroyers of our health rather than our protectors. And he shares some really compelling data in his books about how emotional stress can lead to all kinds of chronic illness for women, autoimmune problems, right through to even cancer. And his case studies focus particularly on women, as he believes women are at more risk of not owning and speaking our emotions. So given my own personal experience with autoimmune problems and the high risk of cancer in my family, this is something that I've taken really seriously over recent years. So to then realise that I wasn't recognising or owning my own anger was, like, quite frankly, a slap in the face, if I'm honest. How would I not notice my anger? How was I not able to connect to it? What was stopping me from acknowledging it and using it appropriately? Because Dr. Gabor Mate states in his book that emotional competence is what we need to develop if we are to protect ourselves from the hidden stresses that create a risk to our health. And for some reason, I was emotionally incompetent when it came to my anger. And as I say, what makes that worse is that I'm a qualified emotional intelligence practitioner. How can I help people become more emotionally intelligent when I'm being unintelligent when it comes to my anger? So as you can imagine, I got really curious about this. And it was kind of hard to begin with. And so I started to unpick it with my therapist, which was kind of fascinating, but also empowering, but also really tricky. And I wanted to share some of my learnings with you, just in case you too struggle to connect and express your emotion in a healthy way. So as part of my journey, I started to learn about the concept of fierce compassion. And I'd been a fan of self-compassion for a little while. I'd studied with Dr. Paul Gilbert, who is a British psychologist and psychotherapist who talks about the kind of compassion-based therapy. And I'd also been following the work of Dr. Kristin Neff. And it was when I read one of Dr. Kristin Neff's books called Fierce Compassion that, like, this huge penny dropped for me. She talks about the yin and yang of self-compassion. So you probably come across yin and yang and you've seen the yin and yang sign. And it's more like an Eastern approach. And it talks about two aspects of our universal energy. So like this universal energetic principle that is in constant dynamic, the yin and yang, and how they interplay and work with each other. So when we're looking at it through the kind of compassion lens, yin is about this stillness. It's about soft. It's about yielding, being receptive and nurturing. And yang is more about movement and forceful and commanding and protecting and goal-orientated. So the yin is more kind of what's classed as the feminine kind of energy. And yang is more of the masculine energy. And regardless of what your gender is, we can have both of those energies. And it's really important that we have both of those energies. But I wonder, as I say those two sets of descriptions, the yin of stillness, soft and yielding, and the yang of movement, firm and forceful, which you feel more aligned to. Because as I say, in theory, we should feel aligned to them both equally because they're kind of complementary expressions of our life force energy, and each plays a crucial role in our well-being. But as women, we're more socialised, more for one than the other. As little girls, we tend to be acknowledged and recognised for being warm and cooperative and concerned for the welfare of others. Whereas men and boys are often seen as strong and goal-orientated and independent, and often kind of allowed to be more of that kind of domineering, perhaps aggressive energy. And as Dr. Kristin Neff brilliantly shorthands this in her book, she talks about the yin being tender compassion and the yang being fierce compassion. And she talks about tender compassion is seen more as a chick thing, and fierce compassion is seen more of a dick thing. So because for so many women, we're socialised to develop those qualities of warmth and care, and men are more respected and seen as more competent when they express anger, whereas for women, we're seen as often unlikable or less capable. We're seen as difficult or classed as a bitch. So we can fall into this kind of good girl syndrome. So it's like the manifestation of the traits that are valued and praised among little girls. And if we deviate from those, we can be made to feel guilty or fearful of being judged. So we kind of strive to be good and virtuous. And I realized that was the case for me. I wasn't allowing myself to recognize my anger unconsciously. This was all out of my awareness as I judged it to be bad and wrong. And I'd actually fall into the trap of telling myself that I was actually more resilient and virtuous for rising above my anger. Like I love Michelle Obama's when they go low, we go high. So I'd almost like trained myself to not feel anger because it felt like I was going low if I went there. I'd seen kind of not getting angry as a good thing, like I was taking the spiritual high ground. But what that means is that it had robbed me, and in Dr. Kristen Neff's work, she talks about it can rob girls and women of our ability to effectively use our anger. Because Dr. Kristen Neff shares, as Dr. Gabor Mate does, by denying women of the free expression of our justified anger, society is forcing us to swallow it, and it's making us ill. And kind of that hits me hard. I don't know, I'll say that again and just notice your reaction. By denying women of the free expression of our justified anger, society is forcing us to swallow it, making us ill. And that's when I knew I had to learn how to connect to my anger and learn to appropriately express it, not only to feel empowered, but also to protect my health. And what I've learned is that anger is a gift. And there's actually 5 key gifts to anger, according to Dr. Kristen Neff. So the first gift is that anger energizes us. It actually mobilizes us to act. It kind of overrides potential for inertia or complacency, and gives us the motivation needed to perhaps stop injury or injustice. So it's actually really useful when it's used appropriately. The second gift is it gives us an incredible focus on what could potentially threaten or harm us. So anger can provide kind of clarity in that exact moment when it's needed, and it acts like this laser beam pinpointing the present danger. So anger has the ability to kind of illuminate a problem that demands our attention, and it can cut through the noise and the crap and really tells us to sit up and pay attention. The third gift is it helps us to defend and protect ourselves. So anger can override our fear response and can help us to fight back against someone or something that is hurting us or perhaps treating us unfairly. So sometimes we need to be angry in order to have the courage to confront the things or people that are threatening or disrespecting us. And because anger energizes us and focuses on the threat, it really equips us to take action to self-protect. The fourth gift is it has a really clear communication function. Anger alerts us to the fact that something's wrong at the same time that it lets others know we're unhappy about it. So kind of how cool is that? It lets us know and it lets other people know. So when I reframed anger as communication, that was actually quite freeing for me. Now, I've got to say, while screaming and shouting isn't effective or useful communication, anger in a controlled way is actually a brilliant form of communication. And in emotional intelligence, we talk about a key area of being emotionally intelligent is being free and in charge of our emotions. And what we mean by that is free to acknowledge and accept them, but in charge of how we communicate that. So being able to acknowledge that we're angry but free to express it in a way that's in charge. So rather than banging and shouting on the table, being able to say, I just need to tell you what you've just said has really made me angry. So that being free and in charge of it, because anger expressed as a firm conviction can cause the other person to pay attention and listen. And the fifth gift of anger is it gives a sense of personal control and empowerment. Dr. Kristen Neff talks about when we're angry and engaged in changing things for the better, we're no longer the helpless victim. Even if we can't change the situation, anger actually prevents us from kind of collapsing into that helpless and hopelessness. And anger reminds us that we have a powerful voice in our lives. And when that anger is focused on alleviating suffering for ourselves and others, it's actually a positive force. And when I heard about that fifth gift, it reminded me of the work of Glennon Doyle. And if you've not come across Glennon, she's the author of several books, one of which her last book was called Untamed. And it's an amazing book if you've not read it. I'll put a link in the show notes. But Glennon Doyle's actually become a huge activist for injustice. And I remember her saying something that really struck me, because she's the founder of an organisation called Together Rising, which is an all-women-led non-profit organisation that has kind of revolutionised grassroots philanthropy. She's raised over 45 million for women, family and children in crisis. And I remember her saying, if you're not angry, you're asleep, in response to the injustices that go on for women in the world. And she's someone who role models being in a fierce compassion and really using it effectively. And I see her using that as that fifth gift of giving her some personal control and empowerment. And actually, as the poet David Whyte so beautifully says, anger is the deepest form of compassion for another, for the world, for the self, for a life, for the body, for a family, and for all our ideals, all vulnerable and all possibly about to be hurt. Stripped of physical imprisonment and violent reaction, anger is the purest form of care. The internal living flame of anger always illuminates what we belong to, what we wish to protect, and what we are willing to hazard ourselves for. And I think, gosh, isn't that beautiful? And what I've come to learn on this journey that I'm still going on is that as long as the yang expression of anger is balanced with the yin energy of concern, it can be a healthy and constructive force. And so knowing this and really beginning to use it in my life has been empowering, but also scary, because it's like new territory for me. And I'm starting to almost kind of test out my anger and my ability to communicate it effectively and what goes on for me as I do that. And as I start to connect and practice using it, it has felt difficult, but my God, has it been empowering. Almost my self-respect has grown for it and my body feels better for it. Because what I came to realize was that although I didn't think I'd got anger, I absolutely did have, but I was turning it on myself. I was using it for kind of self-criticism and self-berating, and often it would leak out. I'd often get angry with my kids really like unjustifiably. And what I realized was it was that anger, as we talk about in emotional intelligence, our emotions are not biodegradable, so they don't go away. So if I was sucking it up and burying it, they don't go away. They kind of sit there knocking on the door going, hello, anybody there? And so it was coming out in kind of unhealthy and unexpected ways. So what I'm starting to realize, as the Zen meditation teacher Joan Halifax says, is that we actually need to develop this strong back and soft front. And you probably know someone in your life that role models this really well. It's that kind of brave, tender ground that we can root our caring deeply. It kind of means having a strong back means being brave and courageous. It's kind of that fearlessness that arises when we feel strong and safe and grounded and have that sense of belonging, when we're in integrity with our values and needs. But having a soft front means staying tender and open in face of whatever discomfort is in front of us, even fear and anger and hatred. It's about embracing the vulnerability and suffering. And Joan Halifax writes beautifully, all too often our so-called strength comes from fear, not love. Instead of having a strong back, many of us have defended front, shielding a weak spine. In other words, we walk around brittle and defensive, trying to conceal our lack of confidence. If we strengthen our back, metaphorically speaking, and develop a spine that's flexible but sturdy, then we can risk having a front that's soft and open, representing choiceless compassion. The place in your body where these two meet, strong back and soft front, is the brave, tender ground in which to root our caring deeply. And that's what I'm aiming for with my anger, embracing the energy that allows me to have a strong back. I almost imagine it like Pilates for the mind and emotions. And in Pilates, we're all about having body integrity and being aligned and having a strong core. And that's what I'm trying to practice now. And I have done, but like I'm widening that capacity. In coaching, we talk about having backbone and heart. It's a famous book that was written by a lady called Mary Beth O'Neill. And backbone is about stating your position, even when it's unpopular. But heart is about how you stay in relationship with others as you do it. So it's that duality of that yin and yang, tender and fierce compassion. And as my colleague at EY, Amy Waters-Cohen, has kind of extensively researched in this area, that kind of paradoxical mind for leadership for the future, it's our ability to be ruthlessly caring. So my wish for you as you navigate life is that you too have a strong back and soft heart. So let's use that anger wisely and healthily to empower ourselves and others. And that's the path I'm walking. And I'd love you to join me on it. Let me know if this podcast episode has resonated with you. As I said right at the beginning, I don't have this all figured out. It feels like I'm a learning edge and I'm leaning into it. But let me know what you think about it. And if you've enjoyed this episode, can you do me a favour? Can you share it with a friend, a colleague, or a family member that you think would enjoy it too? I'm keen to get this free resource into the ears, hearts, and minds of as many working mums as possible. So please do share. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time, take care. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.